Hello, everyone. I'm George Rosca.
And I'm Mark Schneider.
And we want to welcome you to episode 155 of Say What, where we talk about the threats to our children in the public school system, including the mental health crisis of school-aged children induced by bad therapy in schools via social-emotional learning.
That's right, George. Abigail Shrier has done it once again. Her latest book reveals the harms of bad therapy that's destroying the lives and futures of millions of children by therapists who don't want to recognize that their cure is actually the cause of the disaster, or so Abigail Shrier asserts. And we're going to investigate what is really happening in this domain. And I guess, George, we should start with, who is Abigail Shrier? Well, she is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author. She's a graduate of Columbia University, the University of Oxford, and also Yale Law School. And her work appears regularly in the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, and other publications. But she's probably best known, George, as being the author of an incredible book that came out a number of years ago called Irreversible Damage: The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, that we have talked about in length, and we even recommend it on our website at protectourkidsnow.org. Well, now she's written this new book called Bad Therapy, which has just been published. And the social media, she asserts, is the primary transition tool for this craze that's happening. Groomers on their YouTube channels are the primary means of information and indoctrination by anxiety-ridden teenage girls. And I don't know if you remember, George, but she blew open the story about two teachers in the Salinas School District in Monterey, California, that gave a seminar at the California's Teachers Union Conference in Palm Springs on how to set up gender clubs without notifying parents.
Yeah, and this was in 2022.
Right.
And now she is back with a vengeance, because her first book in 2020, it was like banned. Employees at Amazon tried to take it down.
Yep.
Target kicked it out of
Target
the
did
stores
take it down for
officially. And even though it came back on Amazon, like it wasn't allowed to be like advertised through ads on it. So they tried every which way. The book has become a bestseller and a must-read. Virtually in every circle that I know of, people know of this book.
I agree.
But now she wrote a new book, and it's called Bad Therapy. And this latest book, which was just released here at the beginning of 2024, investigates the horrors of bad therapy. Shrier's general thesis is that Gen Z's distress is, we'll use a term here over and over, iatrogenic in origin. That is, that it is caused in large part by the treatment. And the treatment in this case is bad therapy. The therapy that is meant to cure their mental health problems.
So this is an example of where the cure is the disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she aims her fire at the therapeutic mindset that pervades not just the offices of psychologists and counselors, but she also brings in heavily the elementary, middle, and high school classrooms. And she talks about government agencies as well. But a significant chunk of her book talks about classrooms, and she draws the connection of social emotional learning into all of this. This has been something that POK has, a while back, I think during COVID, when COVID hit in 2020, we started to really think about, what are we really about? What is our mission? What is the problem in public schools? How do we succinctly tell parents the problem, right? And so that way they can put their finger on it. And we came up with this idea of the triple threat. And we recognized at that time that the first one, gender ideology, sex and gender theory, pretty easy for parents to understand. Critical race theory.
A little more difficult.
A little more difficult, but they finally got it because it comes with intersectionality and all of the other stuff that we've been talking about. But social emotional learning was this loosey, slimy thing. Like, how do you actually see social emotional learning in the classroom happening, right? I think Abigail finally unlocks this whole just kind of conundrum of what is it? And she really helps us to define what it is by how it's actually practiced in the classroom.
Yeah, just by way of background, so social emotional learning is not a particular curriculum. It was originally developed by James Comer from the Collaborative Association for Social Emotional Learning out of Chicago. This goes back 20 years, George. And it's a means of helping, ostensibly anyway, helping kids to be better at self-awareness, self-discipline, decision-making, managing their lives. You know, they have this circle diagram that they show, and what parent wouldn't want their children to know these things? But really, George, as we point out in our brochures, and we've done episodes on this before, it's a program of replacement parenting in the mode of critical theory.
Exactly.
That's really what it is. And she points out examples of how it works.
Yes. Now, if you don't have the time to read her nice, long, thick book, I highly encourage you to watch 2 interviews, because she's now on this tour being invited all over the podcast world. The first interview is by Dr. Jordan Peterson. So he invited her on her channel. It's about 100 minutes long. Already in its first week has over 400,000 views. And I would say the reason why it's important to watch this interview is because Abigail's talking about Dr. Jordan Peterson's very profession. And he's, a world-renowned teacher at the University of Toronto, but also, practicing, clinical, therapeutic, physician.
He's a psychologist.
He's a psychologist. So he basically confirms all of her findings, which is very interesting. The second interview that I would recommend you guys to watch is the Joe Rogan podcast. And on this interview, at least the YouTube version of it, because this one's on Spotify, but the YouTube version of it, which was truncated, has already 1.4 million views. And I also recommend this interview because Joe Rogan does a good job of pushing back against Abigail's premises.
So he does not take things at face value.
He doesn't. And every pushback he got, Abigail was so well prepared to respond with evidence and connecting the dots for him. And I think he was on board by the end. So watch the Dr. Jordan Peterson interview, the Joe Rogan interview, and what was really cool to see is that not even a week after her book was published, Elon Musk put out a tweet. And he said this book is a must read for parents. His tweet already has 12.4 million views.
This is the same man that accurately defined wokeism as a society-destroying mind virus. So, he has a vested interest in this.
Yes.
It's interesting.
So, in preparing for this kind of synopsis for this podcast episode here on Say What, I also wanted to read what maybe others that don't agree with her say. So I went and I read through 3 different articles that reviewed her book as well. One from the City Journal, which is very favorable to our position. One from the New Statesman, and one from Slate, which is completely opposite, right? And what's pretty interesting to me is that all of them, even the ones that I would have said would not agree with her one bit, couldn't really dispel what she was saying. And the reviews were across the board very positive. So the first question that I wanted to start off with is, does the premise hold any water? So on its own, iatrogenesis is too easy an answer, right, to just say, well, this is a very complex socio-psychological problem, this whole mental health crisis. But But Abigail makes a powerful case that these bad efforts at prevention can boomerang in the minds of our youth. And she gave one really powerful example. For me growing up, and I think for most millennials, and even those who are teachers, we all remember the DARE program, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education. This was supposed to scare us away, right, from doing drugs, and to be able to identify and be aware and, say something. But researchers today are beginning to notice that the same dynamic, in fact, is actually stirring curiosity.
Sure, of course.
And it's making actually kids want to try this kind of stuff.
In fact, there's a natural, for better or worse, sort of a rebellious streak among kids. And the cool kids in particularly, they sort of lead the charge. We're going to push the envelope and see what all the concern is. And we're going to do exactly the opposite of what these well-wishers think we should do or avoid.
And she cites a recent study that is titled More Treatment, but No Less Depression, the Treatment Prevalence Paradox. This is the title of a study on mental health and treatment in Western countries. So not just America, in most Western countries. And it captures this contradiction in our current situation.
The contradiction being the more therapy that we're providing kids, the more depressed they're becoming.
Yes. Yeah. And so in trying to at least dispel the premise, there are evidences like this, study after study, like this study, and like the studies on the DARE program, that it is showing that the opposite effect is actually happening.
Interesting.
And so to give you guys a picture of, what is actually happening, here are some startling statistics. And we have to define these statistics for Gen Z, because the Gen Z is what she focused on.
And these are people that were born between 1997 and 2012, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, that demographic.
And they are not doing well, because according to the CDC, less than 50% of them would describe their own mental health as good. So this is a self-assessment. 42% of them have been diagnosed with some psychiatric disorder.
Wow. Say what?
Yes.
Over 4 in 10 have been diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder.
For Gen Z.
A whole generation of people. Wow.
And 39% are going to therapy at least once a week.
That's a statement. My gosh.
And then here's the even crazier part. So the ones that are not in Gen Z, these are ages 2 to 8 years old. Okay, so this is now the next generation after Gen Z. 1 in 6 U.S. children from the ages of 2 to 8 have been diagnosed with a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder.
Yikes.
Going back now to Gen Z, suicide is the second leading cause of death for Americans aged 10 to 24.
And that's been around, that stat has been unchanged for quite some time now.
And in 2021, 9% of high school students attempted suicide.
Wow.
That is crazy. That's 1 in 10 kids that in high school. Yeah. Kids aged 10 to 24 are dying by suicide has increased by more than 50% over the last 25 years. And emergency room visits, which we've done a whole podcast about this, Mark, that you researched on this, by young women who commit self-harm have doubled over the last 25 years.
Something's not working, George.
Something is not working. And so one of the first places that Abigail Shrier puts her finger on is that the mental health professionals are the problem. Because this entire profession, as even Dr. Jordan Peterson points out, has been taken over by ideologues instead of them truly being medical professionals. Instead of going by the do no harm ethic that has always prevailed in our medical institutions. And one of the most critical examples that she provides is this whole idea of gender affirming care. We've talked about this thing over and over. This is a huge and horrific problem in the medical establishment. Kids are being treated with, genital mutilation for things that are just temporary, things that they're just going through in their puberty and their development life. And so the treatments that are being provided by these mental health professionals are just absolutely atrocious. Like no other generation of these health professionals in the past would have even considered these treatments for the problem that they're seeing in their kids. But not just that, they are also misdiagnosing or creating something out of nothing. So for example, kids are no longer told that they are shy. No, you actually have a bigger problem than shyness. No, you have social anxiety disorder. Ooh, like that's a problem. I got to fix that. No, you're just a shy kid. That's what people would say in the past. Or they are disruptive in school. No, they're not disruptive. They are oppositional defiant disordered kids.
And we should probably point out, George, these are probably tags in the DSM, the Diagnostic Psychological Manual. This is a self-perpetuating juggernaut. Now, we have to state the therapists get paid, right, for their services. And their services are infiltrating the public school system. Many schools now have on-campus health facilities where kids can go and get these kinds of services. But it's not just licensed professionals that are giving kids this kind of counseling. It's just regular people that work in the school district that are also providing this kind of counseling. Oh, you've got an issue? We're here to help.
Correct. And the other problem that she points out about these mental health professionals is that mental health professionals are more inclined to deal with less problematic patients than with the more problematic ones. Why?
Because it's easier.
It's easier, and it's a recurring monthly payment.
It's an annuity stream.
It's an annuity stream. Why would I want to spend the time and hard work to actually help somebody with a bipolar disorder when I can just talk to this shy kid and have
social anxiety disorder?
And just diagnose it as social anxiety disorder. I get to talk to him for 24 months, and their parents are just cutting me.
Code just goes down in the medical insurance, and the payments start coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is a huge problem. And now she links this whole, idea in our society of mental health professionals and this aura we have about them to today's parents. We are the problem too, because we look at these mental health professionals and we give them this state of authority over us. And instead of being confident in our parenting, knowing that, hey, I've watched my parents, how they've raised me. I've watched my grandparents, and how they've talked about this at, family parties and meetings. I'm like, whatever they did turned out just fine. I can do that with my kids. The new generation of parents, meaning my generation, the millennials, are not that way anymore. They second guess themselves in their parenting. And so they take every last drop of words coming out of that mental health professional's mouth, and they're just salivating over it. Oh, so you mean I need to do this? Okay. I'm going to do this with Johnny.
They're looking for the, quote, experts, the subject matter experts. George, I remember back in the mid-1980s, Robert Bella and Richard Marsden wrote this best-selling book called Habits of the Heart. And they warned, George, 40 years ago about the emergence of what they called a therapeutic society, where everybody now was going to a therapist to solve problems that for eons in history people just dealt with in life. And now we're seeing it on steroids.
It's on steroids. And so the advice that Abigail has for parents is, you know what? Grow up, parents. Do what your parents did. You turned out just fine. You don't need, your child to see a therapist week in, week out. Therapy should be reserved for actual problems, serious problems, and it also should be the last resort. And also, research your therapist just as much as you would your doctor who'd maybe perform open heart surgery on you. Like, do some actual research, because there are so many bad ones out there. And the other point she continues to make here is now with the school system. She has finally uncovered the social emotional learning aspect within the schools. And this is what she's saying. Our kids are now simmering in therapy day in, day out. They are constantly being asked, oh, we're going to have an emotional check-in right now, children. All of a sudden, they've had an emotional check-in at 8:30 in the morning before they started the school, then at 10:30 before they start their math class, then at 1:30 before they go to science. They have all these emotional check-ins throughout the day. They become so self-conscious and self-aware of their feelings that they cannot operate throughout the day, because all they're thinking about is, well, how do I feel right now? And she points out example after example where they'll have these mindfulness moments, and all of a sudden a child will share that, their dad is screaming at them, and they'll share some traumatic experience, and then the teachers, 15 minutes later are like, well, we can't do our math assignment anymore because the kids are nowhere in a position to learn math right now. So they just continue to do their therapy by teachers who are not licensed therapists, who don't know what they're doing. Right. And this is what's happening over and over and over. So parents, for us who have been talking about this, about social emotional learning, it's finally catching on, and it's creating a generation of kids who have just everything in their life is a trauma. And in fact, she points out that on TikTok, the hashtag trauma now has over 6 billion views, because our kids have learned this word, and it's like the hot button word now. That's all they use. Whatever small little affliction they might have experienced in life, it has been elevated to traumatic experience.
And technology is not your friend, is it? It's sort of feeding the frenzy. All these apps that are out there.
It's feeding the frenzy. There are apps now on mental wellness and mental well-being that will like automatically warn you, every hour, how do you feel right now? And you rate yourself from 1 to 10 or something, and you're just simmering in that, therapeutic mindset.
Yeah, like one app is called Myala. It's available to any student over the age of 16, according to its website, and it prompts users to check in with their current mental state. As Shrier discovered, the questions, which range from how lonely do you feel to how worried do you feel right now, seem almost designed to encourage a depressive state.
Exactly. So, what's actually then stressing the kids out? It's actually the therapy. The therapy and the constant social emotional learning is creating this trauma.
It becomes a feedback
in
loop.
Children. It's a feedback loop. And so it begs the question, do children actually need therapy? And the answer is overwhelmingly no, and only sometimes yes, in the cases where they actually have real problems. If they are suffering from bipolar disorder, those are real problems. We have known about them for, centuries. There have been, treatments for things like that, and medical and mental health professionals in the past have done their job correctly to address those. But today, everything is considered a mental health problem. And here is where we're at. An entire generation that's been traumatized by bad therapy. And they just don't know it.
Forearmed is forewarned. We've shared this information. The onus is on you now to investigate it yourself. We highly recommend the work of Abigail Shrier. Please look into getting her book, Bad Therapy, and make a conclusion yourself after you read her material. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. George, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. We do encourage you to visit our website at protectourkidsnow.org, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on Say What?